I'm Alexis.
And I'm Tiffany, and we're the hosts of Legit KidLit, a video series where we get to see into the secret and silly lives of authors and illustrators.
We love to celebrate and promote books, but most of all, we want to say hey to all you readers out there trying to find that right book for you. We hope that you can find some new reads after today.
Legit KidLit is excited to welcome two middle grade authors who love animals, Kaela, Noel, and Cory, Leonardo.
Kaela and Cory, thank you for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about the animals that you chose in your most recent books and why you chose them?
Sure. So my book, Coo, is about pigeons, which was basically from the beginning, that's how I pictured it, because the very first time I had an idea for the book, it was when I saw a flock of pigeons taking off from the roof of an abandoned factory in Jersey City, which is a little industrial city opposite New York City. And I had this image of a child living up there with them. And I went home and I just wondered what that would be like. And I started writing. And the beginning of the book never really changed, even though I rewrote the rest of it a lot. I wrote a lot of versions of this before it was published. But along the way, I definitely had periods where I wondered why pigeons, sort of like dark nights of the soul. I remember briefly considering trying to make them into parrots because it seemed like it would solve a lot of the plot complications if they could just talk. And I remember another time thinking maybe ravens would be interesting, like a child raised by ravens. But then that would be more kind of traditional fantasy, which this isn't. This is more like an urban kind of fairy tale. Yeah, but I love pigeons, and I think that they are a very underappreciated species by most Americans. Other parts of the world, in parts of the Mediterranean and the Middle East, pigeons are actually really honored, and people think that they're beautiful, and they're raised for sport and for their beauty, and more commonly than they are here. And but in writing Coo, I learned a lot about pigeon intelligence, and they're very smart birds. They don't get credit for their abilities. For example, scientists can train them to recognize typed up words and spot typos because their visual acuity is so precise that they can notice when there are small changes and small issues. So I think that's just like one pigeon fact of many, and there are a few in the book. It's a fairy tale. It's not real. Like, a child couldn't really be raised by pigeons. We know that. But there are some real pigeon facts buried in here.
I would love to. My most recent book, like I said, is The Hedgehog of Eyes. And if you can see from the picture, the main character is the hedgehog. His name is Marcel. And you know what? I didn't pick him as much as he picked me. I feel like he kind of popped into my head as a hedgehog with glasses. And then once I had my main character, I knew I needed a host of other little furry friends that he could trek around in the woods with. So I chose this little mouse here. Her name is Scamp. And she, if you can see, she's got a cape and a sling shooter. She's very fierce. And then I've got an old grumpy squirrel named Ingot. And then this little guy here, he is a baby raccoon, and his name is Tuffy. But there's a whole bunch of other animals in this book. There's Una, the Luna moth. This up here, if you can see, is Wicked Wing, and she's particularly wicked.
Okay, I know you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but those covers are absolutely adorable, and I would definitely pick them up just because of the cover alone.
I've read Coo and loved that it was pigeons, so I'm glad that you stuck with that because I agree, like, I don't even know anything about pigeons, so that was really cool and different. And urban fantasy, it fits that. I cannot wait to read The Hedgehogs of Oz. I mean, that looks adorable.
Yeah, it's also really cool to learn facts in books that you read. Like right now I'm reading The Silver Arrow, and there was like a fact about a spider. Now I'm going to get it wrong because I'm saying it out loud, but I think it's called a Sparklemuffin. Like there's a spider actually out there that's called a Sparklemuffin, which is interesting. So always cool to learn new facts from books, like real facts.
I just want to say that I hope somebody writes a book about a Sparklemuffin.
I think they're also called peacock spiders. Like they literally look like they have peacock feathers on their back, like when they stick it up. I don't know. It's very interesting. I had to look it up last night.
Look at that! What is this? What is this?
Oh, this thing needs a book. Well, it has a book, but another one. It needs to be on the cover.
I agree.
All right, give us a tour of your bookshelf.
Okay, guys, I am standing up because I'm going to show you some of my bookshelves. Now, I have to tell you, these aren't all of my bookshelves. I actually have books in almost every single room of my house because I have a bit of a book problem. So these are just a couple of my shelves, but these are some of my favorite books because you'll see, and I'm going to turn you around in 1 second, you'll see a whole lot of middle grade books there. And I can't even get back there because there was a chair. But there's middle grade books everywhere, and I like to put some fun things on my shelves. Like that was a gift. That's the ISBN number of my first book in the Library of Congress. This right here is the library I grew up going to, and I love shells and things like that, so I put those on my shelves. I've got books down here, lots of picture books over there, because I love picture books. And then I'll show you. This over here is my special cabinet, and I put a lot of special books in here. I've got tons of Newbery Award winners. I like to keep them all together. And sometimes I liked old books. I like the look of them. I like the bindings on them. I keep lots of favorite books in here too, like my Jane Austen books, or I've got some old Madeleine L'Engle books there. These are some of my absolute favorites. I love Kate DiCamillo. I love E.B. White. There's my own books. Oh, I love the Chronicles of Narnia. And I already passed by these guys over here. Those are good books. And then I've got some old KidLit books over here and some adult books that are really good. More old books over here. Some favorite middle grades over here. I love books, but this is my special cabinet.
Cory, I loved seeing your bookshelves. Those were amazing. I am in a I'm very similar. It was like hearing a kindred spirit talk because I have books in every room. I also have a book problem, but I tell myself, well, my family, we rarely eat out. We don't order in very frequently. We don't take very many vacations, so we get books. And I need them, right? Professional development. Anyway, so I have books in every room of the house, and I have a lot down in the basement, actually in my daughter's playroom area, because they've overflowed. There's more in the living room. And they're just everywhere. I can't give a full tour of all the shelves because my daughter's in there, and I think she's being very patient while I am busy, but I think that would break the spell. So I will give you a tour of some of the ones that are in this room. So I do keep some special ones right here. So let me try flipping this around. So in here, I keep a lot of my favorite books from when I was a child. So I've gone back. I used to get these books, the John Bellairs mystery series, which were illustrated by Edward Gorey. They were published in the 80s and early 90s, and I checked them out of my school library all the time. And as soon as I was, had my own job and was making my own money, I started buying them on eBay because they're mostly out of print now. But a lot of them I've reread, and they really hold up, and they're just really creepy, and I love, but also kind of soulful, and they have a lot of emotional resonance, and they're just very special to me, and they were really influential during my childhood. And then I also have another set of books that are also out of print that were this British series, that was published in the 90s called The Menims. And it's about this family of life-size dolls who live in secret in a house in England and have to hide from the rest of society while they try to, survive as these dolls. It's a very strange premise, but it's beautifully written. And unfortunately, they're also out of print in the United States. But I had them, my school library had them, and I used to check them out and read them all the time. And I have lots of other favorites on these shelves. I really like epic literature, like very old books. So I have the Odyssey in my favorite translation by Robert Fitzgerald, and the Kalevala, which is this kind of epic Finnish poem that was written down in the 1800s but came from much earlier sources, and the language in it is so beautiful. And I find that when I read really beautiful poetry, my prose writing is better. So I read a lot of poetry, and I read a lot of different things. My next book is about bees, and so I have some books that I've used for reference here, like this one, which is a collection of bee poems. I have this book that was written in the 1800s or early 1900s called The Sacred Bee, that Dover reissued, and has all this really interesting bee folklore from around the world and really cool illustrations. So I've used that. And I'm also an enormous fan of Narnia. And so I have all of my Narnia books. I have like editions that I had as a child and other ones, and yeah, and I have other books, just there's books all over the place. The room's kind of messy though. So I cleaned off one part of the room, which was the part so that I could talk to you, and then the rest is mess. So this is how we roll. But yeah, so they're just books. I love books, and I love my job writing books. I feel very fortunate.
Kaela, it's probably good that we don't live closer, because I'd probably be knocking on your door every day looking for a new book, because those books look amazing.
Cory, I would love that. If we lived closer to each other, then we could have tea and hang out, and you could borrow all the books you want, and that would probably be good for me, because I recently counted, and I had like 50 or 60 books unread in my to-be-read pile, which is basically almost a year's worth of books. So I can stand to give some away and lend them out.
What are some books that you loved as a kid, and what are some of your favorite reads right now?
So, some books that I loved as a child and ones that I'm currently reading now, and loving now. So I feel like I talked a little bit about childhood books when I was doing the bookshelf tour, but a few others. I really loved Julie Edwards' books when I was little, and the secret to her is that this is a kind of a pen name, and it's actually Julie Andrews, the famous singer of Sound of Music and Mary Poppins and such. I didn't entirely put that together as a kid, and she's also an extremely talented, or was an extremely talented author. And Mandy, I read. This is my childhood copy. I grew up without a lot of money. My mom was a single mom, and it was like a big deal when I got a book. And this was one that we bought, or she bought me, and so I still have it, and I read it to pieces, almost. It's like starting to fall apart. And it's about a girl who's orphaned, and she discovers this abandoned cottage behind the orphanage where she lives, and she basically plays house and makes it into her own home. And it's a lot about, finding your place and finding a space and making it your own, and it really resonated with me as a kid. And she also wrote another book called The Last of the Really Great Wang Doodles, which is more of a straight up kind of traditional fantasy without stakes being too high. Nothing particularly scary happens. But I just really loved her writing as a kid, and these were definitely two of the books that I read the most frequently. I read them over and over. And as for books that I love right now, we are living in a golden age for children's literature. There's so many good books being published right now, and I find it very difficult to keep up. But a few of them I want to give shout outs for. I am a huge fan of Tanya Guerrero, who wrote last year, her first book was called How to Make Friends with the Sea. And this is her second book, which just came out about a month or two ago. And it's set in Barcelona, and it's about a girl who goes to live with her grandmother there and learns to bake bread, but it's also about emotional transformation and friendship and navigating family disputes. But it's so beautifully written, and Barcelona is so vividly depicted, and food is so written so well. Tanya's a fantastic prose stylist, so I love her books. I also love Jennifer Becker's Stick With Me. We have the same publisher, Green Willow, and she is just phenomenal also at telling a story with a lot of brevity. She doesn't write long, and that's something that I feel like I need to study because my manuscripts are these sprawling things that could be a lot tighter. So I really admire people who can tell a story quickly. Caroline Gertler's Many Points of Me is set in New York City, very familiar stomping ground to me, and she also depicts place so well. You really feel like you're in New York with this book, and I think that's hard to pull off at times, and she really does it, and she also writes beautifully. And Kate Albus's A Place to Hang the Moon, which is set during World War II in Britain, and it's just this really heartwarming book about a trio of orphans looking for a home, and she does historical fiction so well, and you'll just feel this book is like a warm cup of tea, and it just is very comforting. But that's just a few. I also have some that I don't have right next to me. I'm rereading Joan Aiken's series. She was a British author who published the Wolves of Willoughby Chase series from the 60s through the 1990s. So it was a long-running series, even though it only has about 10 books. She took her time with it. But they're really good. So, yeah.
Okay, favorite books from when I was a kid and some of my current favorite books. Well, I'm gonna have to start with like the greatest book of all time. This was my absolute favorite book as a kid. It's a picture book. It's called Imogene's Antlers, and as you can tell, Imogene has a bit of a problem. But I love this book. I still read it all the time. I think it's a masterpiece. But as far as other books that I read as a kid, I loved Piggins, who was a pig butler. That was also a picture book. And then for middle grade books, I think the ones that stick with me the most are the ones that were read aloud, because there's just something magical about having someone read you a book. So I still remember cuddling up with my mom in bed and her reading Narnia. I remember my teacher reading Little House in the Big Woods. And when I started picking books out myself, and it was a lot of series. So I loved Nancy Drew, and I loved The Babysitter's Club. As far as some of my current favorite books, for picture books, I got to show you some of these because these are some of my favorites. I love funny picture books. This one is called A Hungry Lion or A Dwindling Assortment of Animals. It's hysterical, and the animals do dwindle, and you can guess probably why. And I seem to have a theme with animals eating each other, because this is hysterical. We Don't Eat Our Classmates by Ryan T. Higgins. He also writes the Bruce books, which are also hysterical. He's amazing. And then as far as middle grade, Kaela, you're so right about it being a magical time. There's so many good books, and I find that I've been picking up middle grade time and time again, and not even reading much adult books anymore, just because middle grade is amazing. So one of the books I read a couple years ago that still sticks with me today is my friend J. Casper Kramer's book, The Story That Cannot Be Told. It's just a beautifully written folktale. And then I love British authors. And I don't know if you guys have read this one yet. It's called I, Cosmo. It's told from the perspective of the sweetest dog you'll ever meet. So pick this one up. And then Lucy Strange, she writes beautiful, beautiful books. She kind of reminds me a little bit of Lauren Wolk, but like a British version. And this is her latest book. It's called The Ghost of Gosswater. It's a gothic. It's a little bit creepy, but also beautiful and amazing. And then I think you guys will recognize this one. Everyone's been talking about A Wish in the Dark this year, and they've been talking about it because it's just that amazing.
I absolutely loved all of those books, especially Wish in the Dark, and I would have had that in my stack, but I thought I would focus on some of the ones that were published more recently. And but last year I was, cheerleading for both A Wish in the Dark and for the other Newbery winners. Thought they did a good job this year on picking winners. Like they were great books. But to answer the question about the first book that I saw myself in, I would actually say I kind of already talked about Mandy. That was definitely a book that was very close to my heart when I was a child, and I felt like it was just a way that it was like a pathway towards understanding your place in the world when you feel alone. Like that was very much part of my kind of emotional landscape. This book was very important to it. But I don't have my copy on hand, but I was a huge fan of Harriet the Spy. And after I read that book, I wanted to be Harriet the Spy. And I went around with a little notebook and kind of like stared at people and wrote things down, which isn't exactly the most polite thing to do, but she was definitely an influential figure for me. So I would say Harriet the Spy is probably like an honest answer as to the first book that I saw myself in, or that was extremely influential in a kind of identity way.
What would you say is the first book that you saw yourself in?
Okay, the first book I saw myself in, this was a tough question for me because I was the sort of kid that once I found something I liked, I just read it again and again and again, and I didn't really know how to find different kinds of books. And I went to a tiny little school, we didn't have our own library, and so I didn't necessarily have anybody shoving books in my hands and saying, read this. So I think the first time I saw myself in a book in a way, or kind of recognize it, oh, this is a life like my own in a way, was the Babysitter's Club book, because I was a young girl babysitting all the neighborhood, all my parents' friends' kids, and those girls were just amazing to me. I think I wanted to be Stacy or Claudia, but I think I was probably more like a Marianne.
I completely relate. I think that I wanted to be Dawn or Claudia or Stacy, but actually Stacy, probably, yeah. I also loved Babysitter's Club, and I read all of them. I used to check them out over and over again from the library, and I had some of them basically memorized. And I always loved them a lot more than Sweet Valley High, which I tried when I was kind of between Babysitter's Club books, like twiddling my thumbs, waiting for another one to come out. But it never had the same kind of resonance. But also, yeah, I actually loved Marianne because I felt like she represented a character who was a lot closer to who I actually am or was versus the other ones, and I was glad that she was there. The only one I really didn't feel any connection to was Christy.